My name is Mila Lambert. I'm 38 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the quiet force working behind the scenes in my family, the one who keeps things running but never gets the credit. I'm a real estate investor by profession, with over 15 years of experience buying, managing, and growing properties. But unlike the flashy success stories you hear about, my achievements have been deliberately low profile. I never chased the spotlight. Instead, I built my empire quietly, methodically, brick by brick. I prefer it that way. It makes the sting of family exclusion a little easier to bear. Tonight, I find myself at the Lambert family wedding reception, standing at the edge of a crowded room filled with relatives, friends, and colleagues. The grand wedding venue sparkles with chandeliers, polished floors, and perfectly arranged flowers, but none of it feels like mine, at least not yet in their eyes. To everyone else, I'm just the other daughter, the one who faded into the background while my sister Karen basked in the family's admiration. They see me as the quiet one, the one who's somehow always less than. But what they don't realize is how much I've done for this family, how many times I've stepped in to patch up their financial messes, cover their emergencies, and even fund events like this wedding, all without a word of thanks. Tonight, like so many nights before, I'm here because I'm expected to be here, not because I'm wanted. I'm the invisible safety net stretched beneath the family's high-wire axe, and yet, I know every ledger, every unpaid bill, every investment that sustains the Lambert name. They rely on me, but they don't see me. Just moments ago, my father, Richard Lambert, the towering patriarch with a voice as commanding as his presence, raised his glass for a toast. This was supposed to be a celebration of family unity, but instead, he chose to humiliate me in front of everyone. His words cut sharper than any knife. He called me a loser. The room fell silent for a beat, then shifted with uncomfortable murmurs. My heart sank, but I forced myself to stay composed, swallowing the tight lump forming in my throat. It wasn't the first time I'd heard that word from him. For years, he had dismissed my efforts, belittled my choices, and made it clear I wasn't the daughter he'd hoped for. His disdain had settled into my bones, a cruel echo I'd learned to live with. Yet tonight, as he uttered that single word so publicly, the weight of decades crashed down on me. All the sacrifices, all the quiet work behind the scenes, seemed to vanish into thin air. Despite the humiliation, I didn't let my expression betray me. I kept my voice calm, my posture poised, even as my mind raced. This family, this man who stood smugly with glass raised, believed he held all the power, but they had no idea what was really beneath the surface, the foundation I had quietly built without recognition. Around me, the guests exchanged glances, some awkward, some sympathetic. My husband caught my eye and gave me a small, encouraging nod. Emily, my younger cousin and one of my few true confidants, was already biting her lip, clearly upset by my father's cruelty. I felt the familiar tug of protectiveness toward them, but also a growing fire deep inside me. The insult wasn't just a careless comment, it was a challenge. A line has been crossed. Tonight, I stand at a crossroads. For years, I've endured the whispers, the side eyes, the invisible treatment. I've been the family's unacknowledged backbone, never allowed to shine. But this moment, this public slight, has ignited something in me that I can no longer ignore. As the chatter hums around me, I take a slow breath, steadying the storm of emotions. Somewhere beneath the polished surface of this reception hall, beneath the twinkling lights and forced smiles, I am already plotting my next move. Because respect, real respect, isn't given, it's earned. And I've spent a lifetime earning mine in silence. Tonight, the story is far from over. Growing up, the shadow cast by my sister Karen always stretched long and wide, swallowing much of who I was. Karen was the golden child, radiant, charismatic, and effortlessly the center of every family gathering. Wherever she went, approval followed like a halo. My father, Richard, made no secret of his favoritism. It wasn't subtle or hidden behind closed doors. It was a pattern written in his eyes, his words, and the way he carried himself around us. The warmth that he reserved for Karen was a stark contrast to the cold distance he showed me. I was the daughter who came second, or rather, the daughter who barely registered. I remember how, as kids, when Mom would call us to the dinner table, Karen would be praised for her grades, her social charm, the way she excelled in everything she attempted. My accomplishments were glanced over or quietly diminished. When Karen brought home trophies, my father would beam with pride, displaying them like trophies of his own success. When I brought home anything less than perfect, the silence was deafening, or worse, met with a sigh or a sharp remark that I was not trying hard enough. That phrase haunted me for years. The disparity continued beyond childhood. When it came time for college, Karen's education was fully funded, every expense covered without question. I, on the other hand, received a modest contribution, accompanied by pointed comments about being practical and learning the value of money. The message was clear. Karen was the investment, the bright star, while I was expected to fend for myself. It stung, but I swallowed the bitterness, convincing myself that their judgment was justified somehow, that maybe I was the problem. The family business was another battleground. Richard often held meetings about investments and deals, but I was rarely invited. If I did manage to sit in, my ideas were brushed aside or ignored. Karen, meanwhile, was welcomed with open arms. Her occasional input met with smiles and validation. I remember one meeting where I proposed a cautious expansion plan, only to be told it was too conservative and not visionary enough. Karen countered with a flashy idea that Richard immediately praised. It wasn't just favoritism. It was emotional exclusion and dismissal. In family conversations, I was often the scapegoat for minor mishaps. If a bill went unpaid or a deadline was missed, fingers pointed at me as if I were the architect of every failure. I carried the blame silently, absorbing the criticism like a sponge, afraid to argue lest I worsen my standing. Karen, meanwhile, was shielded from such scrutiny, her mistakes forgiven or forgotten. It was a system where loyalty was demanded, but only awarded selectively. Over the years, this dynamic solidified into a painful norm. The constant sidelining taught me to minimize my needs and desires around them. I learned to keep my mouth shut, to smile politely, and to play the role of the compliant daughter. After all, peace was easier than conflict, even if it meant erasing parts of myself. I became an expert at hiding my hurt beneath a calm exterior, convincing the family, and perhaps myself, that I was content with my place. But the more I faded into the background, the more invisible I became. Invitations to family celebrations often felt like obligations rather than invitations, and my contributions went unnoticed or were quietly co-opted by Karen, who thrived in the spotlight. I was the silent engine, the steady hand, the one who made sure everything worked. Yet I was never acknowledged. The family's narrative was clear. Karen was the success, the favored daughter, and I was, well, the other one. Looking back, there are moments that still hurt. The whispered criticisms, the dismissive glances, the overwhelming feeling that I was always the outsider in my own family. But hidden beneath those painful memories was a quiet resolve. I knew my worth, even if they didn't. My silence was not submission. It was patience. A patience born from years of enduring, planning, and waiting for the moment when I could rewrite the story they had written for me. Tonight, as I stand here listening to Richard's cruel words echo in the grand hall, all of those memories flood back. It's a reminder of every slight, every exclusion, every moment I was made to feel less, but it also steals my determination. Because beneath this quiet exterior, I have built a life, a legacy, that they never saw coming, and soon, they will have to see me as more than the shadow of my sister. Despite the cold family dynamics, I've been the one consistently stepping in whenever the Lambert family stumbled financially. It's almost laughable if you think about it. The very people who looked right through me, who dismissed my achievements and minimized my presence, have leaned on me in their moments of crisis time and again. I became their unpaid emergency fund, their invisible safety net, quietly covering bills, resolving debts, and investing in properties that would eventually bear the Lambert name, even if they never knew I was the one making it happen. There were nights when I sat alone at my kitchen table, staring at statements and receipts, calculating how to patch the latest financial hole that had suddenly appeared somewhere in the family's sprawling but fragile empire. My own dreams and ambitions often took a backseat to those crises, but I never complained. After all, I convinced myself, it was what family does. Sacrifices made silently, without fanfare. No one thanked me. No one even noticed. But I was there, doing the heavy lifting. I remember one particularly brutal winter when the family's main rental properties faced severe maintenance issues. Tenants were on the brink of leaving, and if we lost those buildings, it would have crippled the family's income stream. Karen acted as if she was the one orchestrating the fixes, taking calls, scheduling contractors, and mingling with tenants at the management meetings. But behind the scenes, I was the one writing the checks for emergency repairs, personally negotiating with vendors to keep costs down, and even fronting the money before the family's accounts could be sorted out. Karen took all the credit, of course, smiling for visitors and relatives as though she'd pulled it all off single-handedly. I also remember the quiet days when I helped plan this very wedding. While Karen was busy choosing colors, invitations, and the perfect dress, basking in the spotlight, I was the one quietly liaising with caterers, venues, and decorators through countless emails and late-night phone calls. I handled every last detail behind the curtain to make sure the event looked flawless. The irony is that I was often paying for parts of it out of my own pockets without a word of acknowledgement. My husband noticed the toll it took on me, the exhaustion etched into my features, the way my smiles were sometimes a little too forced. He reminded me gently that I didn't have to bear it all alone, but I held on to hope that one day the family would see me for more than just the invisible provider. Jason, my brother-in-law, was another character in this tangled web. He was more than happy to accept my help. Financial advice, loaning money, even just a listening ear when Karen's social ambitions outpaced their resources. But gratitude? Rarely. Instead, I often caught him sharing stories with Karen that subtly hinted I was the problem, the difficult one complicating things. It hurt in ways that words alone can't fully capture. I began to realize that my support was taken for granted, like a service they expected rather than a gift or sacrifice. My children sensed it too. They saw their mother bending over backward for people who never really saw or valued her. Their eyes would shadow with worry when I returned from family gatherings looking drained, the weight of unspoken tensions pressing down on me. Yet, they never doubted me. Their quiet strength and constant support became my refuge. Their belief in me was a balm to the bruised self-esteem that family neglect could not quite erase. Through it all, I maintained a professional distance from the drama, while tethering myself emotionally to the hope of someday belonging. I hoped for a moment of recognition, a simple thank you, or a sign that the sacrifices I made weren't invisible. But the pattern persisted. I gave, and they took. I supported, and they ignored. I stayed silent, and they spoke over me. Tonight, standing in this glittering hall, watching my father's disdainful gaze sweep across me, I feel the full weight of those years. The sacrifices, the sleepless nights spent managing crises no one else would touch, the financial and emotional labor, all dismissed with a single cruel word. But deep inside, I know that the foundation I built quietly is unshakable. The properties I acquired, the investments I managed, the financial stability I maintained, these are the real legacies I hold. I remind myself that I am more than the sister who faded into the background, more than the loser they label me. I am the architect of a future they never expected. And as the music hums around me and guests chat obliviously, I feel something shift, a resolve hardening. I will no longer let my efforts be invisible. The time will come when they will know exactly who I am and what I control. Until then, I will keep playing my part, quietly funding, rescuing, and building, waiting for the moment to step out of the shadows. Because beneath this quiet exterior, I've been the family's backbone, the unseen force holding everything together. And tonight, that truth feels closer to breaking free than ever before. The rehearsal dinner was supposed to be a warm, intimate affair, a moment for family and close friends to gather before the wedding day, share stories, and toast to new beginnings. Instead, it became a stage for yet another public dismissal, a cruel reminder of the invisible role I was expected to play in the Lambert family drama. Karen took center stage early on, as if the room belonged to her alone. She was radiant, as always, the golden child effortlessly drawing everyone's eyes and laughter. I sat quietly at the edge of the long banquet table, a place I had learned was best for me, out of the spotlight, out of the way. My husband squeezed my hand gently, a small anchor of comfort, but I could feel the familiar knot forming in my stomach as Karen launched into her version of family updates. "I just don't get Mila," Karen said loudly, a tinge of mockery in her voice as she turned to a gathering of relatives nearby. "She's always so serious about her work, but I don't see the sparkle, you know. None of her friends are making headlines or attending glamorous events like mine do. Honestly, sometimes I wonder if she's even made any real progress. You have to be more than just practical to succeed these days." Her words carried through the room like ice shards. I caught the sharp intake of breath from my cousin Emily, sitting across from me, and saw my husband's jaw tighten slightly. But the worst reaction came from Richard. My father laughed, a rich, dismissive sound that cut through the warmth of the evening like a knife. His eyes glinted with amusement, not concern, as if Karen's jabs were the greatest joke he'd heard all night. "Exactly," he said, echoing Karen's tone. "What has Mila really done that's worth bragging about? All talk, no real achievement? Sometimes I think she just rides on the family's coattails." I felt the heat rise to my cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from the sheer weight of being so publicly undermined. I opened my mouth to respond, to clarify, to defend the years of silent work, the countless properties I'd acquired, the financial storms I'd weathered alone. But before I could utter a single word, the room's atmosphere thickened with uncomfortable silence. My voice felt small, insignificant, and quickly dismissed. A few distant relatives exchanged knowing looks, whispers fluttering beneath the surface. She never quite made it. Not like Karen, at least. I wasn't just invisible. I was a punchline, a cautionary tale in contrast to my sister's glittering success. I clenched my fists beneath the table, swallowing the bitter taste of their judgment. I reminded myself of all the nights spent poring over budgets to keep family properties afloat, the countless calls to contractors while Karen smiled for the cameras. I thought of the quiet sacrifices, skipping vacations to cover bills, investing in repairs, handling logistics no one else wanted to touch. None of that mattered here. None of that counted. Despite the sting, I kept my face composed, carefully masking the ache. I could see the flicker of guilt in Emily's eyes and the subtle way my husband reached for my hand again, offering silent support. But around me, the world's spotlight shone firmly on Karen, basking in approval and laughter. Karen's words were so casually cruel, so expertly delivered, they left no room for argument. It was as if my existence was a problem to be solved, an inconvenient truth best ignored or minimized. I realized then that the family's definition of success was narrow and shallow, built on appearances and social currency rather than substance or quiet strength. I remembered the countless times I'd tried to engage my father in conversation about family investments, hoping for recognition or at least respect. Each time he brushed me off with a wave or an impatient sigh. Tonight was no different. His laughter wasn't just about the insult, it was a dismissal of my very worth. The rehearsal dinner carried on around me, plates clinking, voices rising, the energy of celebration attempting to mask the undercurrent of disdain. I forced myself to breathe deeply, steadying the swelling tide of frustration and hurt. I had learned long ago that fighting fire with fire in this family only burned me further. Instead, I retreated into silence once more, folding my arms on the table, a quiet observer of the dynamic that left me perpetually sidelined. Yet beneath the surface, a quiet resolve began to thrum, a determination to no longer be the family's footnote, to rewrite the narrative they'd cast me in. Tonight, as Karen's laughter echoed and my father's gaze skirted past me, I understood more clearly than ever. Their dismissal was not a reflection of my worth. It was a reflection of their own blindness, and I would not let their words define me any longer. The wedding toast was meant to be a moment of celebration. A few heartfelt words, a glass raised in honor of new beginnings, family, and the future. But for me, it quickly twisted into something far darker. My father, Richard Lambert, stood at the head of the room, his tall frame silhouetted against the glittering chandeliers. The microphone caught every word as he began his speech, and the crowd hushed, expectant. I had hoped, naively, perhaps, that tonight would be different, that the years of silent sacrifice, the countless hours spent behind the scenes keeping the Lambert name afloat, might finally be acknowledged. But as I listened, my heart sank further with each sentence. Then came the moment I had dreaded but somehow always anticipated. "And then there's Mila," he said, voice dripping with derision, "the family's very own loser." The word hit me like a physical blow. The room froze for a second, a collective intake of breath, the faint rustle of uneasy shifting as guests glanced around. I felt every eye flicker toward me, some with sympathy, many with discomfort. My father didn't pause to allow the tension to settle. Instead, he plunged deeper into his mockery, his voice rising just enough to carry through the hall with cruel clarity. You'd think someone who's been around this family for nearly 40 years might have made something of herself by now. But no, it's all talk and no action with Mila. Always the quiet one, always the one who can't quite get it right. We've learned to expect it, the disappointment, the missed chances. Honestly, it's almost comical at this point. I forced my hands to stay still at my sides, fingers clenched beneath the polished oak podium. My throat tightened as the words echoed, but my face remained calm, a mask carefully constructed from years of practice. Behind the facade, my mind raced, memories flooding in of every time I had been dismissed, every financial crisis I had quietly resolved without credit, every family event I had helped fund, only to be ignored or belittled. Around me, the guests shifted in their seats. I caught the flicker of judgment and discomfort on some faces. Emily, my cousin and one of my few true allies in the family, bit her lip and glanced away, clearly pained by my father's cruelty. My husband's eyes met mine across the room, his expression tight but supportive, a silent promise that I was not alone in this. Even so, it felt like the walls were closing in, the room shrinking around me as my father publicly dismantled my dignity. What stung the most wasn't just the insult itself, it was the long history it carried, the decades of being sidelined, the invisible work behind the scenes, the financial scaffolding I had provided for this family while never being acknowledged. It was the embodiment of every unspoken slight, every dismissive glance, every whispered criticism that I had carried quietly inside. Richard's tone grew sharper, his contempt more biting. "You know, I keep wondering why she even bothers coming to these gatherings. Maybe she hopes to convince herself she belongs. But no matter how many properties she buys or how many bills she pays, it doesn't change the fact that she's the family's failure, the one we all try to ignore." The words felt like acid, burning through the years of patience I'd cultivated. But despite the searing humiliation, I held myself upright, refusing to let the pain show. I had learned long ago that losing composure here would only reinforce their narrative, that I was fragile, not worthy of respect. As Richard spoke, I became acutely aware of the stark contrast between his confident, commanding presence and my own quiet strength simmering beneath the surface. He believed he held all the power in this room, that his authority was absolute. But there was a foundation beneath me, solid and unyielding, one built through years of quiet resilience, financial acumen, and unacknowledged labor. I glanced discreetly at the staff moving about the room, the very people who maintained this elegant venue. What they didn't know, what my family certainly didn't suspect, was that this wasn't just some rented hall. This was my property, a symbol of everything I had built, far from their petty judgments. The guests' eyes flicked back and forth between my father and me, the atmosphere thick with discomfort. A few whispered quietly, casting furtive glances my way. I felt the weight of their stares, some tinged with sympathy, others with disbelief. Karen, ever the social chameleon, looked stunned in a way that was almost comical, her perfectly composed facade cracking just enough to betray a flicker of panic. Despite the humiliation, I let no hint of retaliation seep into my posture or expression. Instead, a cold, fierce determination settled over me, a fire ignited by years of neglect and scorn. This wasn't just an insult. It was a gauntlet thrown down in front of everyone I had ever cared about. Within the silence that followed my father's cutting words, I took a slow, steady breath, feeling the familiar calm that precedes a storm. The seeds of change had been sown tonight. And though no one in that room realized it yet, the tables were about to turn. Because respect, I reminded myself, isn't given freely in the Lambert family. It must be taken. And I was ready to claim mine. The seconds after my father's biting toast stretched out awkwardly, the air thick with a fragile silence that seemed to hold everyone's breath captive. Crystals chimed softly from the chandeliers above, their sparkle blinding against the heavy weight settling inside me. Around the room, guests exchanged uneasy glances. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others tried to avoid looking directly at me. I felt the sting of their gazes like needles pricking my skin. Sympathy from some, judgment from others. Yet, none of that mattered. Not tonight. Inside, a storm was quietly raging. The word loser echoed against the walls of my mind, bouncing back and forth, knocking against memories I had long tried to lock away. My chest tightened, the cold grip of humiliation and rage weaving together into a tangled knot. But outwardly, I maintained my composure. My lips pressed into a thin line, my shoulders squared. I had rehearsed this moment countless times in my head, and I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. As the murmurs and clinking glasses filled the room once more, I slipped into a quiet, internal reckoning. Decades of sacrifices, of unpaid debts, both financial and emotional, flashed through my thoughts like a relentless slideshow. Every sleepless night spent balancing budgets to cover family emergencies. Every call to contractors to fix the crumbling properties nobody else wanted to touch. Every late-night email to wedding planners, catering managers, and decorators, ensuring this very event went off without a hitch. All the moments when I had stepped in, invisible but indispensable. I thought about the winter when the main rental properties threatened to fall apart, tenants ready to leave, and the family's income on the brink of collapse. Karen acted like the savior, charming the tenants with her bright smile. But it was I who was quietly wiring the emergency repair funds, negotiating payment plans, and covering costs out of my own pocket until official accounts caught up. No recognition, no applause, just silence. My mind sifted through the countless family crises where I was the silent rescuer, the go-to person for financial stability, even as Karen basked in the spotlight and my father dismissed my very existence. The term loser felt like a cruel joke to me, because in reality, I had been the lifeline, the backbone, the unseen architect of our family's shaky empire. But along with the anger was an even deeper, more profound realization. All my efforts had been taken for granted, reduced to nothing but background noise. The emotional labor, the countless times I swallowed my pride to keep the peace, the sacrifices I made to avoid rocking the boat, had been utterly invisible. The very people who leaned on me in their darkest moments were the ones who mocked me publicly. It was a betrayal that cut far beyond words. Yet, beneath the simmering fury was a calm, icy resolve settling like steel in my veins. I wasn't going to let this moment define me. I wasn't going to endure another round of humiliation without responding. The years of quiet endurance had brought me here, to this charged moment of reckoning. I could feel the scales tipping, the power shifting beneath the surface. I glanced briefly at my husband, who gave me a subtle but steady nod. His unwavering support was a lifeline, a reminder that I wasn't alone. Emily, too, looked away quickly, biting her lip as if holding back tears. Their presence was a quiet comfort amid the storm. Taking a slow, deliberate breath, I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the sounds of laughter, clinking glasses, and whispered conversations wash over me like distant waves. This was not the end. It was the spark, faint but unmistakable, that would ignite the fire I had kept contained for far too long. No longer would I be the invisible pillar, the family's hidden financier, or their unacknowledged savior. Tonight's insult was not just an attack, it was a challenge I was ready to meet head-on, because beneath this composed surface, I was already planning my next move. The foundation I had built, quiet, steady, unshakable, was waiting to be revealed. And when it was, the Lambert family would have to see me for who I truly am. Not the loser they so readily labeled me, but the woman who owns the very ground beneath their feet. And as the reception resumed around me, the music swelling once again, I felt a fierce certainty settle deep in my bones. The story between us was far from over. The next chapter was mine to write. In the soft glow of the reception's ambient lighting, I slipped away from the crowd, seeking a quiet corner where I could collect my thoughts and plan my next move. The hum of conversations and clinking glasses felt distant, almost muted, as a calm clarity began to settle over me. My father's careless insult had ignited something long dormant, but fiercely alive beneath my composed exterior. Now, I needed to confirm the facts, the concrete truths beneath the family's fragile illusions. I reached for my phone, unlocking it with practiced ease, and opened the secure app I used to manage my real estate portfolio. It was a habit I'd developed over the years, keeping every document, every title deed, every contract meticulously organized and accessible. Tonight, more than ever, I needed to remind myself of the power I held, the assets I had quietly amassed while the family dismissed me as irrelevant. Scrolling through the list of properties, I found the name of the venue where this very wedding was taking place. It was listed under a holding company I had established a decade ago, a web of legal entities designed to protect my investments and maintain discretion. The name on the deed was unmistakably mine, Mila Lambert Holdings, LLC. My heart quickened, but my expression remained steady. This was no longer just a numbers game. It was a symbol of everything I had built, hidden in plain sight. I pulled up the ownership documents, each page a testament to years of careful planning and strategic acquisitions. The venue wasn't just a building, it was a crown jewel in my portfolio, a place I had renovated, maintained, and managed with painstaking attention to detail. The chandeliers above, the polished floors beneath, the exquisite floral arrangements, all facets of a property I owned outright, quietly paying every bill and ensuring every vendor was compensated promptly. The legal paperwork was airtight. No ambiguities, no loopholes. The venue was mine in every sense the law could recognize. And yet, here I was, standing as the family's overlooked daughter, subject to derision and insult, while they reveled in the space I controlled. The irony was as sharp as a blade. I glanced around briefly, noting the staff moving gracefully through the room, the manager overseeing the evening's flow with practiced efficiency. I had already contacted him earlier, discreetly, ensuring that he was aware of my ownership and prepared to support me when the time came. He was professional and understanding, a quiet ally in this unfolding moment. Closing the documents, I felt a surge of empowerment unlike anything I'd experienced in years. The past didn't have to define me anymore. The years of silent sacrifice, the endless financial juggling, the invisible labor, all of it culminated in this undeniable fact. I was in control. This venue, the very stage upon which my humiliation had played out, was mine. I reviewed the plan I had discussed with my lawyer, a trusted confidant who had advised me on the best way to reveal my ownership publicly without giving my family a chance to deflect or discredit me. Timing was everything. The moment had to be perfect, impactful but poised, firm but composed. My goal wasn't vengeance, it was recognition, a reclamation of respect long denied. I thought about the scripts we'd rehearsed in hushed tones, the careful phrases that would make the announcement undeniable and unignorable. The manager was ready to amplify the moment with subtle cues, ensuring the staff's reaction would underscore the truth and shift the room's energy. Behind the calm exterior, I felt a slow-burning fire. This was more than a revelation. It was a challenge to the family's arrogance, a spotlight on their blindness to what I had truly accomplished. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of an emotional outburst or petty retaliation. Instead, I'd let the facts speak for themselves. As I slipped my phone back into my clutch, I straightened my posture and smoothed the front of my dress. My face was serene, a mask of quiet confidence that concealed the storm gathering just beneath the surface. I could almost hear the applause I envisioned, not just from the staff but from anyone who had ever been overlooked, underestimated, or dismissed. The stage was set. The illusion of power my father wielded was about to be shattered by undeniable truth. Tonight, I would no longer be the invisible daughter, the family's silent victim. I would step fully into the light, claiming not just my rightful place in the family narrative, but the tangible proof of my success. And beyond the walls of this glittering ballroom, beyond the disapproving gazes and whispered judgments, a new chapter was beginning, one that I would write with every measured word, every undeniable fact, and every step I took into the spotlight they had tried to keep from me. As the reception hummed on, the initial shock of my father's insult still lingered in the air, like an invisible weight pressing down on my shoulders, but I couldn't afford to let it unravel me. Not here, not now. So I made a quiet decision. I would disengage from the family's petty conversations and instead focus on what truly mattered. I began to navigate the room with deliberate calm, shifting my attention away from the biting whispers and sidelong glances, toward the staff and a few discreet guests who seemed genuinely unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. I found myself drawn toward the perimeter of the hall, where the venue staff moved with practiced grace, unseen architects of the evening's flawless flow. These were the people who set the tables, adjusted the lighting, and ensured every detail sparkled just so. To them, this place wasn't just a backdrop, it was their workplace, their livelihood, and unbeknownst to my family, it was mine too. Approaching the venue manager, a composed man named Thomas, whom I had met briefly during the wedding preparations, I exchanged a subtle nod, our silent signal. Earlier, I had quietly informed him of my ownership status and asked him to be ready for what was to come. Thomas's eyes held a calm understanding, a professional respect that I hadn't expected, but deeply appreciated. There was no fanfare between us, only the quiet acknowledgement of shared purpose. As I continued to move through the room, I engaged softly with the servers, the florists, the technicians, those who worked tirelessly behind the scenes. I asked about their shift, complimented the flawless setup, and listened attentively when they shared small stories about the venue's quirks and history. To them, this space was more than just a building. It was a living entity, a canvas for countless memories. The irony that I was the one who owned it, that I had invested in it and nurtured it back to life, was a secret I carried with a mixture of pride and restrained satisfaction. Meanwhile, the family's conversations swirled around me like white noise. Karen fluttered from group to group, her laughter a little too bright, her eyes flickering occasionally in my direction. Curious, wary, unsettled, Jason hovered nearby, attempting to steer the discussions back toward lighter topics whenever the tension thickened, but I remained distant, my presence more observational than participatory. I was no longer the eager daughter striving for acceptance. I was a poised observer, quietly recalibrating the dynamics. Throughout the evening, I also began taking small but deliberate steps to signal a shift in control. I instructed the venue manager, through a brief discreet message, that any future communications regarding the Lambert family's events or payments should come directly through me. The manager nodded, understanding the gravity without needing further explanation. It was a subtle but firm assertion. The financial lifelines that once flowed unquestioned now had a new gatekeeper. I noticed the subtle reactions around me. My father's gaze occasionally darted my way, a flicker of confusion crossing his face that quickly morphed into guarded wariness. Karen's smile tightened whenever our eyes met, as if sensing the balance was starting to shift. Even Jason seemed unsettled by my quiet withdrawal and the subtle assertion of authority in the background. Despite their unease, no one dared confront me directly. The family, tangled in their own webs of denial and illusion, seemed reluctant, or perhaps unsure, how to respond to this new version of me, composed, controlled, and clearly no longer willing to play the role they had assigned. My husband stood quietly at my side, his steady presence a grounding force as I navigated this delicate phase. Across the room, I caught Emily's eye and offered her a brief, reassuring smile. She returned it with a mixture of pride and concern, recognizing the significance of the moment unfolding. It wasn't just a wedding anymore. It was a turning point. The music swelled softly. Conversations resumed, but with a different rhythm now. The old scripts of family dynamics were losing their grip. I could feel the invisible lines of power beginning to redraw themselves, and the realization sent a quiet thrill through me. I stayed vigilant, aware that every interaction, every glance, every word exchanged could tip the balance further. My plan was not to humiliate, but to claim what was rightfully mine: respect, acknowledgement, and the undeniable truth of my achievements. As the evening wound on, I remained the calm eye in a storm of whispered tensions and shifting alliances. The family's illusion of control was fragile, and I was quietly, steadily, preparing to unravel it. The night was far from over, and the stage was set for a revelation that would leave no room for doubt. The moment had come. The reception was at its peak. Laughter and music filled the air, but beneath the festive hum, a charged stillness had settled over me. I could feel the invisible tension threading through the room, like the quiet before a storm. Richard, my father, was standing near the head table, glass of wine in hand, the smug expression of a man who believed he ruled this family and this space unchallenged. But tonight, that illusion was about to shatter. I moved gracefully toward him, my dress whispering softly against the polished floor. The air smelled faintly of roses and freshly polished wood, the elegant scent mingling with the underlying hint of nervous anticipation that I alone seemed to feel. I caught his eye and gave the smallest nod, a silent signal that I was about to speak. He raised his glass toward me, setting the stage for what he thought was a harmless gesture of dominance. "Dad," I said softly but clearly, my voice calm and steady as I extended my hand toward his wine glass. "Why don't you finish your wine first?" His brow furrowed, confusion flickering across his face. But he obliged, tilting the glass back and swallowing the last sip. The soft clink of the empty glass set a subtle rhythm, a prelude to my words. I took a breath, steadying myself as I turned to face the assembled crowd, the family, friends, and guests who had gathered in this shimmering hall, unaware of the truth beneath their feet. "For years," I began, my voice measured and clear, "this family has been renting this venue for every important celebration, every party, every milestone. Unbeknownst to most of you, including my father here," I glanced pointedly at Richard, who was now visibly stiffening. "I actually own this entire venue." Gasps rippled through the crowd like a sudden wave breaking over a calm shore. The chandeliers above flickered in the soft lighting, casting shadows that danced across stunned faces. Conversations halted mid-sentence. The buzz of chatter dropped to a whispering hush. I could see the disbelief in the eyes of my relatives, their mouths opening and closing like fish out of water, searching for something to say. Richard's hand jerked, and the wine glass he had just emptied slipped from his fingers. It shattered against the marble floor with a sharp, echoing crash that made the room jump. His usual commanding presence faltered for the first time that evening. His proud facade cracked, revealing vulnerability, shock, humiliation, and perhaps the dawning realization that the power dynamics he had long taken for granted were slipping away. Karen's radiant mask faltered next. Her lips parted in a silent gasp, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and disbelief. The air around her seemed to thicken, the confident sparkle in her eyes dimming as she glanced helplessly toward her father, who was now struggling to maintain control over the situation. Then something unexpected happened. A ripple of applause began, not from the family, but from the staff. Servers, bartenders, and coordinators who had been quietly observing from the sidelines started clapping, their smiles genuine and warm. They recognized the truth. They knew who was behind the seamless operation of this venue night after night. It was a small but powerful chorus of validation that echoed through the elegant room, affirming the respect I had long been denied. Turning back to the crowd, I held my chin high, my voice steady but unwavering. For years, this family has been paying full price to celebrate our milestones on property that I have owned, managed, and maintained. I have been the silent force behind many of your comforts, the unseen hand keeping this legacy afloat. Eyes flickered between me and Richard, the silent room heavy with tension. No one interrupted. No one challenged. The weight of the truth hovered, undeniable and raw. I paused, letting the moment stretch, allowing my family to absorb the full impact of what I had revealed. This wasn't just about property or money. It was about respect, recognition, and reclaiming my place in a story they had long tried to rewrite without me. Richard's mouth opened, then closed. His voice lost somewhere between outrage and disbelief. Karen's gaze dropped, unable to meet mine. Even Jason looked uncertain, his usual smooth confidence shaken. I didn't gloat or yell. I simply stood tall, a calm island in the storm I had unleashed. I had turned the tables, not with anger, but with undeniable facts. The venue, the shining symbol of family celebrations and supposed unity, was mine, and so was the narrative that came with it. The staff's applause swelled, a testament to the unseen work I had done, the respect I had earned outside the narrow confines of family favoritism. As the echoes of the glass breaking faded into silence, the room's energy shifted irrevocably. The Lambert family's carefully constructed image of dominance and control was cracking, and I was the catalyst. Tonight, standing there amidst shattered glass and stunned faces, I knew I had crossed a threshold. The game had changed. The story of who I was and who I would be was no longer theirs to dictate. The next move was mine. The moment I dropped the bombshell that I owned the entire venue where the wedding was unfolding, a tangible shockwave jolted through the room. Richard's usual air of unshakable authority crumbled visibly, like a fortress suddenly breached. His eyes, once sharp and commanding, darted nervously, seeking some foothold, some retort to deflect the impact. But there was nothing. The silence that followed my revelation was thick, heavy with disbelief, and rapidly spiraling tension. Then came the sound of the wine glass slipping from his trembling fingers. The fragile crystal shattered on the marble floor, its sharp crash slicing through the stunned hush, echoing off the grand walls. The shards glistened scattered at his feet, a stark metaphor for the brittle facade of control he had just lost. Richard's face drained of color, his jaw clenched as if trying to keep his dignity from tumbling alongside the broken glass. For once, the patriarch looked not like an immovable titan, but a man exposed, vulnerable, unmoored. Karen's reaction was immediate and electric. The poised, glowing image of the golden child fractured before my eyes. Her perfect smile faltered, lips parting in a silent gasp, eyes wide with shock and something deeper, fear. She glanced frantically at her father, as if searching for rescue or some whispered plan to regain the upper hand. But Richard was a shadow of himself now, his usual commanding voice replaced by strained silence. The cracks in their unbreakable bond were laid bare in that moment, and the room sensed it. The guests, caught in the wave of revelation, shifted uneasily. Some whispered behind cupped hands, others stared, eyes locked between my father and me, trying to reconcile the woman they'd dismissed with the undeniable reality standing before them. The air was thick with a mix of astonishment, disbelief, and an unspoken question. How had we all missed this truth for so long? Then, something unexpected rippled through the audience, not from family, but from behind the scenes. The venue staff, those tireless workers who had orchestrated the flawless evening, began to applaud. The applause was soft at first, hesitant, then grew firm and genuine. Servers, bartenders, coordinators, all those often invisible cogs in the family's grand machine, recognized the truth that had just been unveiled. Their claps echoed like a chorus of validation, cutting through years of silence and neglect. I caught the proud, warm smiles from the staff, a stark contrast to the stunned faces of my family. Here were people who saw me not as an invisible shadow, but as a leader and provider. Their applause was a powerful acknowledgement of the hard work and dedication I had poured into this venue, of the life I'd breathed into this property while my family dismissed me. Behind me, I sensed the shifting tides. Richard's mouth opened to protest, to regain lost ground, but no words came out. His voice felt swallowed by the weight of the moment and the sudden collapse of his perceived authority. Karen lowered her gaze, unable or unwilling to face me, her usual bravado replaced by a brittle silence that spoke volumes. Jason, too, looked unsettled. His usual smooth demeanor cracked as he glanced nervously between his wife and her father. The family's carefully constructed web of superiority and control was unraveling right before their eyes, and no one was prepared for the fallout. I stood tall and steady, my voice calm but resolute as I addressed the room again. For years, this family has been paying full price to celebrate milestones in a venue I own, manage, and maintain, I said, letting the words settle like stones in the quiet. I have been the silent force behind many comforts you've enjoyed, the unseen hand keeping this legacy afloat. There was no triumph in my tone, only truth, clear and undeniable. The guests absorbed the weight of my statement, the truth piercing through the veneer of family loyalty and long-held assumptions. No one interrupted. No one dared dispute the facts. I glanced purposefully at Richard, the man who had belittled me publicly, who had shaped family narratives to exclude me, now faced his own irrelevance in the glow of this revelation. The power balance, once so rigid, had shifted, and everyone could feel it. Around me, the applause from the staff swelled, a chorus of respect and acknowledgement that my family had long withheld. Their clapping filled the room with a new energy, one that no amount of family denial could silence. In that charged silence, the Lambert family looked smaller, fragile in their pride and control, and I, the daughter they had dismissed, stood at the center, quiet, resolute, and finally seen. But this was no conclusion. The real reckoning had only just begun. In the days that followed the wedding, the atmosphere within the Lambert family shifted in ways I hadn't fully anticipated, but perhaps should have. The revelation about my ownership of the venue was no longer a secret. It had leaked beyond the confines of that glittering ballroom, seeping into family conversations, social circles, and even local gossip columns. Karen's carefully cultivated image, once untouchable, began to show cracks. The golden child's veneer of effortless success was tarnished by whispers and sideways glances that questioned how much she truly controlled, or even understood, the family's sprawling holdings. At first, Karen tried to maintain her dominance, the social queen bee who always managed to smile through any storm. But the damage was done. Invitations she once received with ease grew scarce. Events she hoped to headline suddenly excluded her. Even some of her closest friends seemed to distance themselves, their smiles a little tighter, their compliments a little less sincere. It was a slow unraveling, one I watched with a mixture of quiet vindication and cautious sadness. I wasn't eager to see her fall, but I wasn't going to pretend that the consequences of her and my father's arrogance wouldn't catch up to her. Meanwhile, my father's world began to crumble in subtler, yet more troubling ways. Richard Lambert, the patriarch who had wielded authority with such confidence, found himself vulnerable, not just socially, but physically and emotionally. The public embarrassment he suffered at the wedding seemed to gnaw at him relentlessly. His usual sharp tone softened in family meetings, replaced by a restless, guarded demeanor that betrayed his insecurity. I noticed the subtle shakes in his hands when he thought no one was watching, the way his eyes darted anxiously during conversations that once felt routine. Even his health took a hit. A faint cough here, a stiff back there, signs that the stress was exacting a toll he could no longer ignore. Financially, the repercussions were more immediate and tangible. I began to exercise the control I had quietly prepared for, gradually withholding the financial support tied to my properties, support that the family had long taken for granted. Emergency repairs, maintenance funding, and other critical expenses that I had previously covered without question were now paused or rerouted. The ripple effect was immediate. Properties began to show signs of neglect. Vendors called with overdue invoices, and the cracks in the Lambert empire became impossible to hide. Karen was quick to plead behind closed doors, sending messages through Jason and other family intermediaries, desperately trying to restore the flow of funds and salvage her precarious standing. But I stood firm. These were not negotiations or emotional appeals. They were boundaries, clear, non-negotiable lines drawn in the sand. Respect and acknowledgement were prerequisites for any continued support. The family could no longer rely on my goodwill as a given. It had to be earned. Jason, ever the anxious mediator, attempted to smooth tensions, his voice often caught between loyalty to his wife and the reality of our changing dynamics. But his efforts fell short. I documented every interaction meticulously: calls, emails, texts, creating an unassailable record of the shifting tides. This time, I wasn't just protecting assets. I was asserting my worth and setting terms that had been ignored for far too long. The extended family's reactions varied. Some, previously indifferent or complicit in my marginalization, began to show genuine remorse. Aunts, cousins, even a few distant uncles reached out cautiously, acknowledging the unfairness of how I'd been treated. Their apologies were tentative, but sincere, signaling cracks in the family's long-standing denial. Others, however, doubled down on denial and resentment, unable or unwilling to face the truth. They whispered behind closed doors, painting me as vindictive or ungrateful, clinging to old narratives that favored Karen and Richard. This divide widened the rift within the Lambert clan, fracturing relationships that had once seemed unbreakable. Family dinners became tense affairs, conversations laced with unspoken grievances and sharp glances. The old hierarchy, based on favoritism and control, was dissolving, replaced by a new order I was quietly helping to shape. Through it all, I found strength in my husband's unwavering support and in the steady presence of Emily, whose loyalty remained a comforting constant amid the shifting sands. Together, we navigated the complexities of family upheaval, holding on to the hope that respect and honesty could still pave a way forward. The wedding venue, once a symbol of family legacy manipulated by others, now stood as a testament to my resilience, a tangible reminder that true power lies not in inherited titles or empty words, but in quiet determination, strategic action, and the courage to claim one's worth. The battle lines had been drawn, and though the path ahead was uncertain and fraught with challenges, I was no longer invisible. The Lambert family would have to reckon with that truth, and with me. The days and weeks after the wedding felt like stepping into a new world, one where the old rules no longer applied, where the invisible lines of family loyalty and obligation were redrawn with clarity and purpose. I could feel the shift deep within myself, a quiet but resolute transformation that had been simmering beneath the surface for years, now breaking free. The revelation of my ownership had cracked the old foundation, and from those cracks, new boundaries had to be built. Boundaries defined by respect, honesty, and equality, not by favoritism or unearned entitlement. I began by setting clear terms for any future contact with the Lambert family. Conversations were no longer casual or one-sided. They were intentional and deliberate. I communicated firmly that respect was the non-negotiable baseline. Dismissive remarks like "loser" or any form of public humiliation would not be tolerated. Honesty became a demand, too. I insisted on transparency regarding family finances, decisions, and communications. The era of whispered secrets, hidden agendas, and manipulative half-truths was over. And equality, the most radical shift of all, meant that no one, not even my father or sister, could assume authority over matters I was directly responsible for without consultation and acknowledgement. It was unsettling at first. The family struggled to adjust to these new dynamics. Richard, once the towering, unchallenged patriarch, now seemed smaller, more cautious. His bluster gave way to thinly veiled attempts to regain control, but I stood firm, unwavering. Karen vacillated between denial, anger, and a reluctant acceptance that her privileged position was no longer guaranteed. Jason's usual attempts to smooth over tensions were met with polite but firm boundaries. The family, for all their wealth and influence, was learning that the silent daughter they had dismissed for years was no longer playing by their rules. I didn't seek to punish or humiliate. My goal was dignity and fairness. This meant distancing myself from toxic patterns that had defined so much of my life. I limited interactions that felt draining or disrespectful, opting instead to invest my energy where it was reciprocated and valued. My husband remained a steady anchor throughout, reminding me that my worth wasn't tied to the family's recognition, but rooted in my own integrity and accomplishments. Our children became a source of light, their pride and unconditional love reinforcing my resolve. Emily, my cousin and one of the few who had always seen me clearly, became an even closer confidant. Together, we navigated the complexities of restructuring family relationships. She helped me hold the line when the old narratives tried to pull me back, and celebrated the victories, however small. Through her support, I rediscovered the power of genuine connection that transcended blood ties marred by favoritism and neglect. There were moments of genuine remorse from some family members, aunts, uncles, even distant cousins, who reached out tentatively, acknowledging past mistakes and expressing a desire to rebuild with honesty and respect. These overtures were fragile but meaningful, glimpses of hope that the family could evolve beyond its toxic legacy. However, others retreated into denial and resentment, clinging to old grievances and refusing to accept the new order. The divide underlined the painful reality that change often comes with loss of illusions, loss of easy alliances, and sometimes loss of relationships themselves. Financial control became a practical tool in this new landscape. I managed my properties with renewed diligence, ensuring that support was extended only when respect and communication aligned with the new terms. It was a delicate balance, firm but fair, signaling that support was not an obligation but a privilege earned through mutual respect. The family had learned, sometimes painfully, that the infrastructure they depended on was no longer a limitless safety net. Through all this, I found an unexpected peace. For the first time in my life, I was fully in control of my narrative and my boundaries. The wedding venue, once just a backdrop for family drama and exclusion, now stood as a monument to my resilience and quiet strength. It embodied everything I had built, not just in bricks and mortar, but in self-worth and dignity. My story was no longer about being the loser or the overlooked daughter. It was about a woman who chose herself, who demanded fairness, and who redefined family on her own terms. The path ahead remained uncertain, and not every door would reopen. But that was okay, because for the first time, I was free to create relationships grounded in respect, honesty, and equality, and to surround myself with those who truly valued me. The Lambert family, with all its complexities and contradictions, would have to decide what kind of future it wanted. As for me, I was ready to step into mine, fully seen, fully honored, and fully myself.